John Robb here, interviewing Lora Logic. First played sax, you're about 13, and it's an interesting instrument to pick up at that age. You know, I don't remember many people playing sax when I was 13.
Um, it is an interesting, but I was always a bit odd, and I always wanted to do different things in my life. I did hear the saxophone as I was growing up because my dad, although he wasn't a musician himself, he didn't play anything, but he worshipped the saxophone. He loved Stan Getz, Charlie Parker, all the sort of jazz greats. I wasn't particularly into jazz music at the time, but it went into my bloodstream. He literally 24/7. He always had a jazz saxophonist playing, and my mum very much wanted me to take up an instrument, and I'd already rejected about 5 or 6 instruments. They lasted a few weeks. I'd been
Yeah.
through violin and guitar, all the school the school schedule, and got totally bored with them. And she said, "What would you like to play next?" And I said, "The saxophone," and not thinking that that would really be on the cards. And I just came home one day, and there was a saxophone. They bought me a saxophone. Yeah.
I mean,
So
how do you learn it? I mean, it's quite, it's not like a guitar. You know, everyone knows a bit, can plonk around on a guitar, but a saxophone is quite difficult to get to a certain level, especially, and I imagine you're probably in isolation then, weren't you?
um, yeah, well, they didn't teach it at school. My mother found me this chap in downtown Willesden Green, um, who had about 8 mistresses and children all over the place, and he gave me a few lessons, basics, busking. He taught me how to busk and how to read basic sax tunes. Um, but mainly I just practiced in my bedroom. I had a cupboard, and I used to point the bell into the cupboard so as not to freak the neighbours out too much. And I just play along to records, anything, Mark Bolan, David Bowie, South Pacific, Jesus Christ Superstar. I just play along.
I read somewhere that what you were trying to do on a sax was try to match Mark Bolan's vocals. You know, that amazing trill he had in his vocals. I really love the idea of that.
Yeah, I wasn't really conscious, but I was so into Mark Bolan. He was probably my first hero. So I guess, yeah, I guess it went in there. Um, I never set out to be a great saxophonist. It was just a way of expressing myself at the time. Then my first band was Ray Spex, so that was my training ground. I didn't know anything different.
Had you played with anybody else before that?
No,
Because I mean, yeah, at the time when you joined X-Ray Specs, you were 16, weren't you? So there's not a lot of time to play with somebody else, is there?
no, I was actually 15 when I went to the audition.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
like now, you know, now most people in bands are in their 20s. You don't really get people 15 joining a band that's about to get somewhere. It's people forget how young people in that period were in that scene, weren't they?
yeah, 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 very young. Um, there was nothing to follow, or we just jumped in. There was
Mm.
no bar measures, or it was just totally spontaneous. The
And
whole the whole
what was it
scene
like
with
the
the
first
band.
rehearsal? I mean, you know, if you've got an electric instrument, everyone just plugs in and plays and bashes around. But a saxophone is quite an unusual thing to bring into a rock band. I know Roxy Music have done it. I know there is other people who have saxophones before, but at that kind of level, you know, like ostensibly a garage band walking in with a saxophone, trying to find your space in the sound. I mean, what was that like?
It was just totally natural. The thing is, Polly was so larger than life and so different. She was also very different to people in the other bands. They were a bit more regimented, like 4-piece male bands, and but Polly was so different in every way. So I felt quite subdued next to her. Um, there was nothing holding us back. Yeah, just express a pure, unadulterated expression.
Yeah. I mean, it worked perfectly. I mean, it's only a brief period, but it did work really perfectly. I mean, visually and sound wise, you were perfect foils for each other. You know, the way your sax worked around her voice, and also what you both look like as well. You know, it's brief but very iconic.
Yeah, yeah. It was. It was just like a flash of lightning. Really.
I mean, did you have I mean, was this all purely on instinct, or did you have a sense that when you were playing that you work because she had a very idiosyncratic vocal style, which is almost like a musical instrument on its own. I mean, were you
Mm.
aware of all that, or was it just playing off each other without even thinking about it?
Well, she had the vocal first. She had these kind of hammering, hammering melodies, and for me that was great. It left me so much space. It was almost like monotone in a way. Her melodies, very simple and monotone. So that left me so much room to work melodically around her melodies, yeah, and the vocal lines, which I really enjoyed. And nobody said, "Oh, you can't play that," or "That's too melodic," or "It's not punky," or I just had these tunes in my head, and I didn't even really think, do they does this sound okay as an arrangement with this song? I just yeah, I just played them. It was a bit Dadaistic, really.
Yeah.
Just put them in there, and yeah, it was just a spontaneous flow.
Yeah, I mean, that spontaneous flow and Dadaistic actually sums it up in a sense. There's a fluidity to the sax, and you know, and it kind of threads its way around the ramalama of the band and makes it sound sophisticated in a way that probably nobody was aware of at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, so you kind of playing with a vocal, but also kind of playing with the song, and it's I mean the parts are great. I mean, was that something you were aware of? Was something you were trying to do, or was it?
I think I was trying to get into the emotion of what Polly was feeling and the lyrics and the emotion, how I could express that on the saxophone. I think that was one level of it as well. And the fun. There was so much fun in those Ray Spex songs. So I think looking back, some of those sax riffs, they are a bit tongue in cheek. They're a bit silly. They're melodic. They're silly. They're just yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, actually, on all your life, the sax parts you do are like that, aren't they? They are quite quirky, and then they're kind of quite fluid, aren't they? There's a couple of different things going on there, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm quite emotional when I sing or I play the sax. So I think I play it in quite an emotional way, the
Mm.
saxophone.
So,
Whatever emotion that is, whether it's bluesy or silly or yeah.
so it's kind of you tuning into the songs. I mean, would it happen the other way around? I mean, would you put a sax part in there and it would change the song and everyone else would play towards the sax, or would you kind of, well, were you kind of putting the color into the song on top?
Um, well, I think for the most part, Jack Airport, he'd worked the chords out. Polly had these kind of very monotone melodies, and so he worked the chords out. So they had that going first. Yeah, and then I just put some frills, whatever I wanted on top of that in the rehearsal. And some of the songs we didn't actually rehearse that much before the first gig, and maybe Jack had only just heard the melody, and then yeah, maybe second rehearsal, the bass got added, and the drums and the saxophone all came together very quickly.
It's amazing that it could be such a fast snapshot and work so perfectly. It's like people labor over these things for years, don't they? But you can actually do it in two rehearsals.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
just the impetuousness of youth, isn't it? The daredevil of being young, isn't it?
yeah. But there was a yeah, there was a chemistry there, an unconscious chemistry, I think, in X-ray specs. Um, totally unmeditated. You know,
Mm.
now if I work on a sax part, you've got garage band and you've got time to think about it. And although I've always seen myself with the saxophone, I've always seen myself as a channel. I don't think too much about it. I just hear, I hear the melodies in my head. And I think a lot of musicians will say that. You just turn the button on, and then you feel like you're some kind of channel.
Mm. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. It's actually there already,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
And
yeah,
also the band look great as well. You and Polly, the pictures. This again, it's a perfect foil. And I was reading somewhere that, I mean, you wore the big raincoat, but you wore, I thought that was for because it looked good, but apparently you wore it for the people spitting at the band, weren't they?
yeah. That became the main reason. That did become the main reason at the Roxy right from the beginning. There was torrential spit pours.
It's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, the worst thing was just the spit in the bell of the saxophone.
Ugh.
That was horrible because you had to deal with it afterwards. Because when you get moisture in the saxophone, you're supposed to dry it out with a handkerchief or something. Or
Mm.
nowadays they have these long sponge things on sticks, and you just put them down the saxophone and dry out the moisture because it rots the rubber pads otherwise. If you don't dry up the spit and the moisture, and there's enough of your own spit going in the
Yeah.
saxophone without a whole audience gobbing at you, the front row at least. And sometimes I used to come on stage, a couple of gigs, more than a couple of gigs. That the audience would get on stage. So then sometimes the spit would be too close for comfort.
It's crazy. It's a mad thing, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, I guess it's also quite weird because you were part of a punk scene, but nobody actually knew what punk was it? It was completely undefined. It could be anything, and you kind of gone into this thing with having no idea what it was. So when you answered the advert, you didn't even know what the band was, did you? You just went because you liked the look of the advert.
Yeah, it just stuck out. All the others were so boring, sort of pub rock band. Musicians wanted pub rock band, experience required. And there weren't that many adverts anyway. There's only, a few Melody Maker and NME maybe. It was only the second time I was even looking in a paper. I just knew I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to get out of my bedroom cupboard and play with people. Yeah, and as you say, punk hadn't happened. It wasn't a recognised movement. So it looked like the only possibility was a pub rock band. But then I thought maybe there's some kind of interesting folk band, some kind of Irish band or something. Maybe there's something apart from a pub rock band.
Mm, mm.
I was just looking, but I was really only the second time that I opened Melody Maker, I saw that advert. So it was all
Really
quick,
quick.
very,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
was there a sense of the styling of the band? Because Polly herself obviously had her own sort of closed stall, didn't she? And she was into like a very quirky but very original kind of like fashion. I mean, was there a sense of what the band should look like as well? Because that was important at the time. What things looked like was important as what they sounded like.
It was very important to Polly, very
Mm.
important, yeah. Maybe even before she wrote the songs, she'd been thinking about the image of the band, and she'd been designing clothes with her friend Sophie. Um, it was very important. It was important to her how we looked as well. And my hair was a little long when I came to the audition. The first drummer, Rich T, he'd played in Queen way back, the band Queen, and he had long curly hair. So he was there in the first rehearsal. And then we actually had a bass player and a drummer. One was called Valhalla. They were from a New York band, but they both had long hair, and she didn't want that. So she actually got a pair of kitchen scissors and she cut my hair off in the rehearsal. And it was all so quick, I didn't really know what was going on. And then she was going towards Rich Dean, basically saying, your locks have to go too. said, my locks are not going. And so he had to leave because he didn't want to cut his hair.
That's very telling of the time, really, isn't it?
Yeah. But she kept her hair.
Oh,
She
yeah,
had
yeah, that's noticeable, isn't it?
gorgeous black curls, and she didn't cut her hair. But she had an idea how she wanted us to look in the very beginning.
And ironically, you've kept the short hair.
Well, I have, yeah. I mean, I had long hair since then. In Essential Logic, I had longer hair, and I used to perm it as well because I've always had very thin hair. So I used to perm it, really cheap perms, and then it all fell out. But nowadays, I just do what's simple. It's easy. I don't even have to brush it. Just wear hats and turbans when it gets cold. That's it.
So how long did it last for when you were in the band? It's a matter of months, isn't it? But it's quite high impact for a very short amount of time, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, how long did it last for?
Yeah, it's about 6 months that you played Ray Spex. I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, I joined in autumn. The audition was in autumn. I think we did our first gig, wasn't it? Was it February? The Roxy Club, because the Roxy Club closed in April, as far as I remember. There's only a few months there. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the punk movement lasted the duration that the Roxy Club was open, and then everything changed after that, really, because Andy Chowowski, I always say his name wrong, Andy Chowowski.
Chakowski, yeah.
Chowowski, yeah. I mean, he was very much. He gave shelter to punks from all over the UK. Yeah, he gave us all shelter, and the community met at the Roxy in the beginning. So when that closed, then it all changed after that.
I mean, was there any sense that you were going to get removed from the band before the end, or was it just completely out of the blue?
Well, for me, it was out of the blue. Yeah, it was out of the blue. There was one. I remember being at Polly's house, and they were talking about one review, that James Suck had written. You probably know about that one. Yeah, saying that the saxophone is Ray Spex. And then she was quite derogatory about the way that Polly looked, and for some reason I never at that time we were at Polly's house, but I didn't understand why she was so reactive to it. I mean, the band was just on and up, and everybody loved Polly, and nobody could say a bad thing about her. But there was just this one review by James Suck, and it really seemed to bug her. But that was that. I didn't think any more of it, and I didn't think anything would come of it. And I remember Falcon was just saying to her, the manager, he was just saying, oh, she's just an F in this, and she's an F in that, and don't worry about it. But then a few weeks later, we hadn't had a rehearsal for ages. I thought, this is strange. Well, you probably know the story. I've told this story so many times. Falcon rang me up, and he just said, I said, when's the next rehearsal? He said, oh, didn't you know? We found a new saxophone player. And I was gutted. I couldn't understand why at all, because it all been going so well. The band was on the up and up. We recorded Bondage Up Yours. The chemistry was there. It was great. I mean, I was besties with Polly when I joined the band. We did so many things together. We had so much fun. We used to ride on the top of a double-decker bus, scaring old ladies with our plastic animals in our day-glow baskets. We had fun. We had a lot of fun. We used to charge down the King's Road. There was the Teds and the punks, and there was so much excitement. We used to sit on her clothes store in King's Road and chat to people, and we had great fun. So for me, really, it came out of the blue. I couldn't understand it. And then Falcon said, well, I said, why? My head was spinning. I couldn't understand when he said that we found a new saxophone player. So I said, why? And he said, well, because she thinks you're a black witch and you've put a curse on her. and it just got more outlandish. What?
That's quite outlandish.
Yeah. I thought,
I mean,
yeah. And then, yeah, so he said that, and he said, she's been struggling a bit mentally recently. It's getting to her a bit, and you had to leave for the sake of the band, to keep Polly peaceful. We had to find another sax player. But then I was only 16, so then I analysed it afterwards. I was trying to analyse it, and it just didn't make any sense on any level. I mean, the way that he told me that, the manager, it was just so impersonal, hard-hearted. It was, it was my life. It was my dream come true at that age, to be in a band like Ray Spex, to have had that friendship with Polly, which, by the way, rekindled later on. It rekindled many times, but in that patch. And then later I understood it was because her bipolar kicked in at that time. But I didn't know that at the time. There was really no signs for me that she was mentally unstable. She did get very emotional when she was performing, but a lot of performers do. And after she came off, I think she found it very hard to come down after performing. Come down. And sometimes she'd get very upset about people or things that happened before the gig or during the gig or afterwards. And I was so green, I didn't know much about the world then. But looking back, I can see there was a lot of insecurity there. There was a whole thing with the slits when we were playing at the Roxy, and I think Ariat there was some strange rivalry that I wasn't even aware of between the slits and X-Ray Spex. And I think Ari pulled the plug. She pulled the electricity out before we went on, something like that. And she took it really personally, Polly. She would take things very personally.
what was it like when they actually played your sax parts on the records? I always thought that was quite weird. They didn't make any new ones up. They just carried on with your parts.
Well, Falcon instructed him to because, my parts worked, people liked them. And there wasn't much time also because Polly's mental health degenerated very rapidly. From the time I was kicked out, actually, they didn't do many gigs after that. They did Europe, they did a couple of gigs in Europe, they did America, 2 or 3 gigs in America, and then the whole thing collapsed, and Falcon could see it was going to collapse really soon. So I think he thought, well, it's safer just to keep Lora's riffs anyway. We'll just get a session sax player or whoever he was. I don't know, I clocked off. I stopped listening to music. I just didn't even follow Ray Spex. I didn't know what was happening. But with hindsight, yeah, it was just more. It was simpler just to tell the new sax player just play them the same. They worked. So
Did they not ask you though? Say, we're actually going to use your parts. I mean, that's
nothing. There was no communication. No communication. No. I mean, I can understand there'd be no communication from Polly because she'd made the decision and she was in that headspace. But it would have been nice if, the manager had said something or, no credit on the album, nothing. I put in the time with the band. If you just want to look at it like that, yeah.
I mean, you could tell your parts. I mean, that they sound like you. I think the weird thing was that most people thought you were actually still in the band when you weren't.
Yeah, some people did.
Yeah,
They do now.
to this
People
day.
still
Yeah.
think that now. I know. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
after that, you went to art school, didn't you, for a bit?
Briefly, yeah.
Or was that an attempt to get away from music, or to try and find something else?
Yeah, I didn't want anything more to do with the music business. thought it was horrible. I didn't know anything about it, but that was my only experience. I mean, I hadn't been paid. I think Falcon paid me £200, and then he made me sign this really dodgy contract because I was underage. I couldn't sign a contract, so he came to my father's house and woodled my dad into signing something on my behalf. It wasn't even a proper contract. I don't know if I should be telling you all this.
Well, I could take it out, don't worry.
Yeah, anyway, he bamboozled my dad into signing a contract on my behalf because I was underage. And it's a bogus contract. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything.
So when you put Essential Logic together, was that like a reaction against that kind of, old school music business way of doing it? Because Essential Logic was very much from the squats, is kind of free form. It's almost like the opposite, isn't it, of being in a kind of an old school kind of showbiz kind of situation.
Yeah, I felt very much at home and comfortable with that setup. I mean, it was really because of rough trade, but I didn't set out to form another band. I didn't have any songs. I didn't see myself as a singer-songwriter. As far as I was concerned at the time, well, I had to do something, and I spent most of my time in the art room at school. So I had an idea I'd like to study photography, and then I got, on the strength of my portfolio, I got into St. Martin's and they took me there. And I think I was doing a foundation, but I spent most of my time in the photography room. It was a ghost town. It was really strange. There weren't many people there at the time, and my tutor was always having a nervous breakdown, so I never met him. And everyone else was off down the pub snorting cocaine at lunchtime. So it was a pretty weird atmosphere. But when I was at art school, I was approached by somebody called Jeff Mann, and his father had a record label called Cells Records, an independent record label. And he tracked me down when I was at art school. I think he was waiting outside the art school one time. And he said, "How'd you like to make a single? You were the best thing about Ray Spex, and I'll hire a nice studio for you and just go and make a single. We'll try it, see what happens." I said, "No, I don't want anything. I'm not interested. Not interested." And then, but he kept badgering me. He badgered me a few times. I said, "I don't have any songs." He said, "Well, go home and write a song." So I went home and I just wrote Aerosol Burns in about 10 minutes.
It's a good start, isn't it?
It's a good start. And I didn't know any musicians. But then, I don't remember how, but I found some Ray Spex fans. I think maybe a couple of them were living near my mum's house. One was a bass player called Tim, and there was a guitarist called Stuart Action. And I just gave them a cassette, and then we just met at St. John's Wood. It was a really posh recording studio that Jeff Mann had hired. We met there, and I got hold of Rich T, who'd also been kicked out of Ray Spex. So we were like the rejects. We were like the Ray Spex rejects. Yeah, and then it was all very posh. It was only the second time I'd ever been in a recording studio. And first take, we just hammered out Aerosol Burns. Just hammered it out.
How did you write the song? Did you write it as a vocal thing, or did you work it out on the sax, or could you play other instruments and you sort of worked it out from a couple of chords, or did you just sing it out the band?
I think the words came first. Actually, it was in my mind. I think I was thinking, I want to write something a little bit like tongue-in-cheek, Spexy type thing, a bit like, I'm trying to think of the word without saying a rude word, like a takeoff of an Ray Spex song.
Pastiche, in a way.
Yeah. So I wasn't just trying to copy the Ray Spex style, but I wanted to just like do a tongue-in-cheek take. So I guess, and I just came up with this title, Aerosol Burns, which is a little bit Spexy as a lyric, and then this it flowed into this other idea. So yeah, I wrote the words first, the melody, um, and then I think I sent the cassette to Stuart Action, and he just got a couple of punky chords, and then I thought of a sax part to that, and then I don't think Tim Wright had even heard of it. I think he just came along to the studio and just worked it out really quickly
Mm.
in the studio. And I don't think Rich T had heard it either. He just turned up the studio, as far as I remember.
Another
And then
example of how brilliant and
sorry,
another example of the off the cuff nature of that period where people just went in at things free form, but somehow came up with the right answers.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I mean, from that, so from there, you kind of with the essential logic, you kind of extrapolate that idea, and it's not. I mean, all the stuff isn't like aerosol burns, but it's kind of like almost like a deconstruction of it, isn't it? Like in all the little different styles of what you could possibly do with that lineup.
yeah. It was a weird band, that first incarnation of Essential Logic. I mean, the music we made, it was really strange. You know, when I listened to it after time, actually, I went for a few years. That first album, Beat Rhythm News. Um, I don't know how we did it. We did rehearse for a long time. Our first gig was at the Marquee, and I had this idea in my head. We have to rehearse. We have to get it right, and that's what bands do. Like, if you want to be a proper band, you have to rehearse. And we rehearsed 2 or 3 times. That's why it's very tight. That first album, you know, all the instrumentation, it's not improvised. It's very tight, tightly composed. You know, the way it all leads, that was all rehearsed. There's no improvisation on that album. Very tightly rehearsed. Because we played quite a long time before we recorded it. And we did quite a few gigs before we recorded it. Um,
And quite quickly,
yeah,
you move away from the spexy kind of thing, don't you? You find your own space.
yeah, yeah, very, yeah, yeah.
And also,
And
you
I think those songs were largely came from the lyrics. The lyrics came first.
oh, is that how you wrote
Those
most of the songs? You start the lyrics,
Most of the songs, yeah, would come from the lyrics first.
and also you become almost like Rough Trade's kind of house sax player, don't you? You start doing lots of sessions, don't you?
Yeah, well, that was just Jeff Travis. What happened? The connection with Rough Trade that came about because Jeff Mann himself's records. We'd recorded Aerosol Burns, and then he said we need to get some proper distribution for this single. So I don't think he knew Jeff Travis. He just walked into Jeff Travis's office with me, I think, and Jeff Travis loved it. He just loved it. He said, "Yeah, just come with us, come on to Rough Trade." And whatever I threw from then on at Jeff, he loved it all. He never tried to change anything that we gave to him or we presented to him. He just took it all and he put it all out. And then he suggested, after a while, he introduced me to Mayo Thompson from Red Crayola, and then the Raincoats. I played on that first album. And we did a tour, I think Scritti Politti. We did a tour with Scritti Politti. I think I remember playing on stage with them a couple of times as well. Who else was there? Yeah, then the Stranglers approached me, and just Dennis Bovell, one album, a few people like that. It was great. I love to play with other people.
I mean, that the Stranglers track is absolutely fantastic piece of sax playing. There's like two things going on. There's like a little sledgehammer riff and this kind of free form jazz thing. I mean, what was that session like? Was it? Did they just had the track and they just let you do what you want over it, or did they have a sense of what they wanted?
Um, well, I met them the once when they kind of kidnapped me and took me to this country house in Buckinghamshire, and we were supposed to have a rehearsal in the barn, but I was too stoned. They'd like. Well, it was really funny. I just got this. I got a letter from John Jack Burnell in the post to my parents' house. I was living at home with my parents in Wembley. And I got, it was either a postcard or it was a letter. And I seem to remember he was saying, we're on tour in Japan, but we'd like to meet you when we get back. I just thought it was funny. I was just young. And then I got a phone call and he rang up one day and he said, how would you like to come to our country, stay and bring a saxophone? We can have a jam. So I thought it was all very exciting. And then, I can't remember who, someone said to me, take a friend with you, take a chaperone. And this big Land Rover just pulled up outside my parents' house one day. And I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't say I'm going to the Stranglers' lair.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good, does it?
Doesn't really sound good, no. They were only just acclimatizing to the fact that, you know, I'd been in a punk rock band, and they actually came to the Roxy. They came to the Roxy to my first gig with Ray Spex, and they were the only people there, you know, over the age maybe of 30. And my father came in a very smart coat, and my mum came very, very smart. And as soon as I saw them, I said, you have to leave now. You will get lynched. And they did leave, actually. I think they were petrified.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
But anyway, so back to the Stranglers. Yeah, so they sent this Land Rover. I forget his name, like this legendary driver, a roadie driver, who was legendary in the Stranglers camp. And so my school friend, and I sat on the back seat, and as soon as we pulled out of my parents' road, he lit up this bulbous thing with flames coming round it, passed it to the back seat. I think after half an hour, I don't really remember much after that. I remember bits. I remember being in the farmhouse kitchen. I remember Jet Black making these amazing, I think they called them jet burgers. And we were eating a meal, and Jet Black had an apron on, and he was serving us these famous burgers that he used to make. And I have a vague memory of being in a barn where we were rehearsing, and it was very loud. But that's about it. I don't remember much more than that. But the next thing that happened was, I think they thought they'd do it in a more grounded way, and they sent me a cassette of Hey Rise of the Robots, and they said, could you think of a sax part? So I worked something out at home, and then I met them at TW recording studios, and I just laid it down. Yeah.
So it was just that track. So when you were rehearsing in the barn, it was an attempt to get that track together.
I don't remember hearing that track before they sent me the cassette. I'm not sure. I don't remember which songs we might have gone through, whether it was just a jam. I don't know. I was so far gone. I mean, I'd kind of dabbled a little bit in intoxicants before that, but nothing like what was passed around in that Land Rover. And I think even since then, I've never had anything as strong as that. I don't know what they put in it.
So the studio session was much more disciplined then?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was recording the album, and it was very disciplined. Yeah.
And is that the way you would normally work? You know, would you normally go, you know, with the other collaborations you did, you go in, someone have the track up and you just put the parts in, or, you know, they send you a cassette and you work the parts out?
It was different, really. Different situations for different bands. With Dennis Bovell, I just turned out and just jammed to one of the tracks. That's one of my favourite contributions I think I've ever made. I love that song. It's called Better. A song called Better. I forget the name of the album. I really like that. It was lovely working with Dennis Bovell, a real serious musicians.
He's a great producer, isn't he? And a great songwriter as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was an amazing experience. Just the way that he tuned into my style and the way that he accommodated that, the way he accommodated that to the song, it was really nice sort of fusion.
Mm.
And then the raincoats, I remember, yeah, because I just wail on that. I had a soprano and I just wailed on it. So I don't think there would have been a rehearsal for that. Um, Red Crayola was also very spontaneous.
Mm.
Although I do remember having a cassette. I played with them on 2 or 3 albums and quite a few singles. I did 2 tours of England and Europe with Red Crayola, and that was fun because Gina Birch was part of that Red Crayola collaboration as well. I used to love being with Gina.
Mm.
She's a very spontaneous artist.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's very much the nature of Raincoats and Ray Crayola as well, and it's all about the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
So you had a quite good little setup there, didn't you? You were like this kind of super session player for the Cutting Edge Underground, part of the Rough Trade family. Central Logic's got, it's got a lot of cred. There's definitely space for it, but and that sort of stopped as well. And you were saying that it's just a lifestyle, living that kind of lifestyle, and eventually caught up with you, and you had to change your life really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was living. I didn't really know how to look after myself. I didn't even know you had to drink water or eat fruits. We didn't have an official kitchen or an official bathroom in the squat where we lived in. I remember going to a bathhouse, a Victorian bathhouse in somewhere like Westbourne Grove, and just having a weekly bath there, a big Victorian bathtub, and you'd get, I don't know, 20 minutes ration in that bathtub, 50p, I think it was.
Yeah.
Um, so, I just didn't know these basics yet. And living in a squat for 2 or 3 years, and I didn't know anybody that didn't smoke strong things. And it was just, my health went down physically and mentally. And it got to a point I was feeling the superficiality of relationships. Um, yeah, I just wanted to, well, I think the thing that nailed it was I had been um, experimenting with different drugs, and we were recording Pedigree Charm. We were sharing a studio space with This Heat in Brixton, Cold Harbour Lane, and underground. It used to be a meat fridge, and it was underground. It didn't have any windows. There was no light coming in there. And we spent about 9 months recording Pedigree Charm there. And I remember being in one Rasta's house, again, smoking something very strong. And then my body started to propel across the floor. And I was shaking like a leaf. And it was an epileptic fit that I was having.
Mm.
And everyone else was so stoned, they didn't even really notice that I was on the floor shaking like a leaf. Eventually, someone picked me up, carried me upstairs to a bed. And I had this out of body experience. And I remember looking down onto my body. And simultaneously, I'd started visiting the Krishna temple because my best friend at school, I'd seen her. I was making a film called Crystal Gazing, and we were filming out and about in Notting Hill. And I'd seen the Hare Krishna people on Portobello Road chanting and dancing. And I saw my best friend with them. And she'd been a hardcore punk. She'd been manically depressed and on really rough drugs, amphetamines and speed. She'd been in a sorry way. And then I saw her with the Hare Krishnas, looking all happy and bubbly. She was wearing a sari and she had the Ganges clay on her forehead. And she said, "Oh, come and see me. I live at the Krishna temple now in Soho." So I did. I went to see her, but I was thinking, I'll have to get her out. She's been swallowed up by some strange cult, and I have to get her out. But when I walked into the temple, right from the beginning, I was just really, really overwhelmed by the people and the food and the philosophy, the simple lifestyle, and the energy which these people radiated. Um, I was just very, very attracted. So I started visiting. So when I had this epileptic fit then in Brixton, in this Rasta's house, I already knew about Krishna. And I left my body and I was looking down on my body, shaking like a leaf. And I had faith. I had faith that Krishna was God. And I started talking to Krishna. And I said, Krishna, if you put me back in my body, I'll clean my act up, and I'll respect my human body more. We're just talking like this. And then I came out of the epileptic fit, but it was a real game changer for me. It was a meltdown. It was, it really was the start of a new chapter after that.
I mean,
Because
how long was it from that till you moved into the manor? Was it a few months, or was it, initially was it going to the temple in Soho and sort of like being half in, half out, or was it very quickly you went to, do the full lifestyle?
no, I was visiting because we were recording Pedigree Charm for about 9 months. And I made a friendship also with Mary. She used to be called Mad Mary. She was Polly's best friend when I knew Polly. And again, she'd been hardcore punk. And unbeknown to me, she also joined the Krishna community and she'd been living in temples. And in fact, she was the first person to give me a Bhagavad Gita and to take me to the manor. She said, I've got this far out place I really want to take you to. And she took me to the manor. The country estate that George Harrison donated to the Krishna movement. So it's kind of things where I didn't really connect the dots, but these things were happening. But I was visiting the temple for quite a while before I decided to jump in. And I literally had the few things that I had in the squat. He just took them and I just moved in. I moved in, I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I want to try this for a few months. I want to forget about the music and I want to try this lifestyle. I want to try living like these people. And I want to come off drugs. And I thought I can always go back to the music.
Mm.
So that was it.
Yes, there's quite a long gap without the music, but you still do music, don't you? Because eventually you actually, when you're in there, you meet Polly again, don't you? And you do that band Juggernaut, great Indian word, and you play Glastonbury. So it's kind of music still in your life, but not as much, is it? And the Boy George record as well, of course.
Yeah. Well, after living in temple ashrams, I lived at the manor. I stayed in different temples in Europe and Soho Street, and there was another one at that time in Worcester called Chaitanya College, which was where I lived with Polly. We spent quite a few months living together there, and it was there that Polly wrote the words to Prayer for Peace, the new single. In fact, there's a new playlist on Spotify which releases Polly's Conscious Consumer Prayer for Peace and the new Essential Logic Prayer for Peace. But it was at that time when we were living at Chaitanya College that she wrote that song and she asked me to write a sax line for it. And we recorded it in a simple demo studio in that temple in Worcestershire. And we made a really down-home video for that as well.
Was that the first time you'd seen her since the band, or were you still in touch before that? I mean, were you even aware that she was a Krishna as well?
No, I had no idea. It was the shock of my life to find out that she was visiting that Soho Street temple. So, oh no, she's the last person I ever want to see again. We'd had no contact since since I'd become the Wicked Witch who had laid endless curses on her. We'd had no contact. Um, but of course, she'd been through so much since then. She was 17, and this must have been nearly 4 years later. That it's amazing, amazing karma. She was visiting Soho Street Temple, and I tried to avoid her in the beginning. Someone told me, they said, "Do you know that Polly Styrene is coming to the lunch programs here, and she's reading Bhagavad Gita." It's a very small temple, Soho Street. You can't. I don't
Mm.
know if you've been.
I have,
You
yeah.
can't escape.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the restaurant downstairs, and then you've got the small little temple room upstairs. You can't run away from anyone in that temple. And it was inevitable. One day, we just bumped into each other, and she said, "Oh, hello." I went, "Hello." But we were different people then. We'd both been through so much, and you know, it was great. We were god sisters.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your lives are unintentionally entwined, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, it is very interesting the way. Well, the very first time I saw Polly, I felt like I'd always known her. I felt this feeling there, even before I had any philosophy in my life or I
Mm.
knew anything about karma or reincarnation. Um, I just felt like I'd always known her. It, yeah.
So when you did Juggernauts, I mean, that was just something just to play now and then, wasn't it? That was not a serious concern, or was it? Or was it a different way of making music, a spiritual way of making music, just something? I mean, what made you pick up the music again?
Well, the Krishna devotees, they used to go to Glastonbury Festival every year and distribute free food and chant, and they'd have a tent there anyway. And we'd both moved into the temple. And there's so many musicians in the Krishna community, so many good musicians. So it was just sort of natural, it's kind of inevitable that um, we wanted to make music at some point again. Oh, and so yeah, she had the idea. She said, "Let's form a band called Juggernaut, and we'll do three of your songs. We'll do three of mine." And then there was another chap called Keishi, and he was Jamaican, and he had the most incredible songs and a beautiful voice, and it always had a smile like the sun on his face. So he performed some reggae songs, some sort of light reggae songs. And then Polly, for that Glastonbury gig, she wrote Trick of the Witch. Um, she did Trick of the Witch. Actually, I don't think she performed Prayer for Peace for that. Um, I just remember what's on the video. And I wrote a song called Got Me in a Nutshell, um, which was on my Instagram recently.
Mm.
I was just trying to bury that. I was hoping nobody would ever see it, but people did see it and it's come out. So yeah, it's kind of cute in a strange kind of way. Um, so yeah, we just formed this little band. I remember this guitarist came from Australia, then this bass player I think came from America. We did the Glastonbury gig, and then we did a little concert at the Savoy Hotel as well, around about that time. It was the Women of the Year luncheon, and we were invited to go and to perform. And I remember performing Nutshell, and yeah, I think Polly performed Trick of the Witch there as well. Um, so yeah, we just did sporadic things, but unfortunately, even after becoming involved with a Krishna lifestyle, Polly was always up and down, and it got to a point she couldn't actually stay living. Although she lived separately in the community, she had her own static home and she had her own space. Celeste was very little at that time, and it was very demanding for her, really, because of her bipolar, to raise Celeste as a young child. She did have wonderful help, from other friends in the community, and I remember being with Celeste quite often
Mm.
when she was a child and looking after her and spending time with her. Um, but she was always in and out of some kind of hospital care. Or, um, so after she left Temples, um, yeah, I mean, Polly got back into the music again. Well, then we came together in what was it? When was Conscious Consumer released? That's
96, something like that. Yeah.
96, right. So we were both, after 3 years, I moved out of the Temple, but I stayed nearby, near to Watford, because I still wanted to have a contact manner. I stayed nearby and I got a 4-track Tascam recorder and I started just recording all by myself, which I'd never done before. I started writing songs and just recording. I got a keyboard. That's when I recorded Marika and a few tracks that are in the box set. Marika, Stay High, there's a whole bunch of songs that I recorded. I never thought anything would happen to those songs, but then they just came to surface a couple of years ago, and Cargo said they wanted to release all the old stuff as well. So back to Conscious Consumer, Polly just rang me up one day and she was living outside. We'd talk and then we wouldn't talk through all the years because she'd ring me up in the middle of the night and then I became the witch again. Sometimes we were like god sisters and, you know, it was a loving, sweet relationship. And other times I was the wicked witch again. She'd ring me up, she'd say things like, "You've put a curse on me." And so then I just stopped talking to her because it was impossible, because of the bipolar. It was impossible to have a relationship. And I just found it disturbing. And I couldn't help her.
Mm.
And it wasn't just me, like, it would happen to other people as well. She had a list of people that she'd ring up in the middle of the night and project her fears and her phobias, different people. She'd project her fears onto them. So, and then she rang me up one day and said, "How do you like to make a new album?" I said, "I'd love to. A new Ray Spex album. Come over, come and stay with me for 3 weeks and we'll make a new album." And I had a 4-year-old, my first daughter, 4-year-old at the time. So, but I was really excited about the idea of a new Ray Spex album. So I thought, what have I got to lose if it doesn't work out? I'll just get on the train and come home. So I moved in with her. And so I was staying with her, and then we went to the studio during the day, and it was okay for the first few days, but then I realized she wasn't sleeping. When her bipolar kicked in, she wouldn't sleep, and that just compounded the problem. She wouldn't eat. She'd become fixated about eating or not eating and not sleeping, and then it would just get worse and worse. So as the album was progressively recorded, she became worse and worse, and then I became the witch again, and then she started plotting with the engineer how I couldn't be in the same room as them, and then she wanted to mix all my saxophones out of Conscious Consumer at the end of it after I spent 3 weeks recording them, and it was the same old weird stuff. But it was a nice experience. It was lovely working with Crispian Mills,
Mm-hmm.
and his drummer in Kula Shaker. And of course, it was nice to play with Paul Dean again from Ray Spex. And Polly's voice was great as always, and I love the songs. I think the songs were great. I loved adding parts to them. So they're down, they're recorded, and I don't regret doing it. But by then I didn't take her seriously, because, you know, she was a victim of her mind, a victim of her childhood, a victim of so many things.
Mm.
I'm happy to have played on that album. Yeah.
And at that time, you did that session with Boy George as well, and ended up on Top of the Pops, which is quite a weird curveball, isn't it?
Yeah, he just started visiting the manor, and I didn't know. I just saw him one time, and he was with always forget his good friend Philip someone
Oh, I know.
character. He was one of with his Philip, I think, one of his wonderful friends, and they just came into the monks' quarters at the manor, outrageous as ever. I'm not sure if that was the first time he'd ever visited George Harrison's manor. And I remember the door was open, and I remember peeking at them, sitting. I was just there standing in a sari, just living my normal devotee life, and the door was open, and I saw Boy George in Philip's salon. They were laughing and like looking at all the monks' dresses and just taking the mickey. They were a bit riotous, probably, for the situation, looking at the monks' legs and stuff like that. And then the next thing I knew, he was recording, Bow Down Mister. And he wanted a choir of Krishna people to sing the chorus. So I remember we did Parkinson's, and we did the Aspel Show, and we did Top of the Pops. There was about 10 of us singing the Hare Krishna chorus, and that was fun. That was a lot of fun.
It's such an odd pop career, very like a potted pop career, isn't it? Yeah.
What you mean on Boy George's?
Well, yeah, with your thing, isn't it? It's like big gaps, then to these weird curveballs, like ending up on Michael Parkinson's show singing in a Krishna choir with Boy George.
Yeah, I've had a colourful life. Yeah.
And then there's like another gap, and then suddenly you re-emerge out of the blue. You know, it was one of those, you know, people. But whatever happened to Lora Logic? That's what people will say for ages, and suddenly there you were back again, working with youth, new songs, and putting all your old stuff back out in a box set. So what brought about that? You know, that change.
I think my daughters were grown up. I always found it. I had to turn the creative button off while I was mum because I did homeschooling. We spent a lot of time in India. We moved around. I had adventures with my daughters, and I knew I couldn't really do both. And I didn't think there's much point being a mum and not being there for them. So, kind of person, whatever I do wholeheartedly. But then they grew up, and my youngest daughter, Marlene, she kept saying, "Mum, you got to get back into your music," and I'd never even heard of Instagram. I'd hardly heard of Facebook. I'd been on a different channel for quite a while. So she set up an Instagram page for me, and then as soon as I got on it, she took this photo of me, and then I got these messages saying, "Oh yeah, still listening to your music, and so glad you're back." And I thought, "What? People are still listening to my music?" I couldn't believe it. So I thought, "Oh, that's nice. I'm not still listening to my music. I can't." So that came together, and then round about the same time, another Krishna friend of mine, a keyboardist called Haladar, she said, "Come around for a cup of tea," and she said, "You've got to start making music again." And she took me around to a friend of hers called Jorge Morales, a very nice South American musician who had a little bedroom recording studio near her in Watford. And we just I did have a couple of songs on a back burner. One of them was Mother Earth and Fallible Soldiers, which appear on the new album. Some lyrics. And I just started singing the melodies, and Jorge started playing some bass and guitar, and Haladar put down some keyboards, and that was it. We just started recording. It kind of all came together. It just seemed to happen, and then I never looked back from that. And I carried on working with Jorge until lockdown kicked in. And then a Mac computer came into the house. I didn't even know very much about computers, what to speak of GarageBand. a Mac computer came into the house for someone else and I stole it. It was lockdown, and I started to look at GarageBand on the screen, and actually before that I'd been to see Youth, because I thought I had these few demo recordings that I'd done with Jorge, and I thought I need someone to produce this. It's been a long time and be lovely to work. I'd never brought in a producer before. We'd always done it ourselves. I'd worked with Phil Legg in Essential Logic, and we'd co-produced Pedigree Charm and Beat Rhythm News. We'd never really had an official producer. So I'd heard about Youth. I don't remember meeting him in those early days, even though we're both the same age as each other and we have so much in common. But I heard that he wanted to release a single with Hare Krishna mantra, because no single, apart from Boy George, since George Harrison's Hare Krishna mantra, there hadn't been much mantra released. So one of my Krishna friends told me he really wants to do something with mantra. So I thought, I'll just go and see him anyway. I played the demos. I only had one song with mantra on, and that was Prayer for Peace, the song that I'd arranged with Polly all those years ago. So I had 4 or 5 songs. I just invited myself round to Youth's house. Didn't know that much about him. Knocked on his door. And we spent 4 or 5 hours together, and he just listened to the demos. He said, yeah, this is great. How can I help? And I said, I'd really like to collaborate with you. And I didn't really know how or what form that would take. I said, I suppose I'm going to have to re-record these demos. They're a bit ropey. We'd just been working on a 16-track Fostex, and a couple of the channels didn't even work. And I thought, we're going to have to get digital, whatever that means, and we're going to have to start working with computers. And I just had an old Shure microphone. I'm going to have to do this properly. And you just said, no, you don't need to re-record them at all. What about the vocals? No. He said, just keep going as you are. He said, I love this raw sounds, and then just send them to me one by one. So I really didn't know what form the collaboration was going to take. And then lockdown kicked in. But he did, he assigned Natalia, this beautiful lady, this engineer, Natalia Milanese, who was working with Youth for many years, and she worked at Abbey Road as well. He said, you can work with her, get your basic recordings up to scratch, she'll help you, send them to her, then Natalia would send them to Youth. And then if Youth felt like he wanted to add something like a guitar or a bass, or he wanted to change something, he would. And we did everything long distance because it was in lockdown. And he was in Spain most of the time. So it was a bit mysterious, our working relationship. It was a bit mysterious, and it was a bit uncertain. And I'd go for months without hearing from him. And I couldn't really believe the album was ever going to get finished or it would ever manifest. I was just struggling on a day-to-day level, trying to figure out what you do when you've recorded 64 saxophone parts. Do you send them all off, or? And meanwhile, Natalia was chastising me and getting on my case. She said, can't send me 50 vocal parts, and you can't send me, you have to edit them down. So then I was really learning GarageBand as I went along. So it was a very intense experience, very worthwhile and very satisfying, because I got things on the new album, The Land of Kali. I really felt like I got things exactly how I wanted them. Because there was no time kicking at the door. There was no studio fees, no studio bills. It was just as much as I could extract from GarageBand, and Apple support were my lifesavers. I was just always on the phone to them. What do I do now? And They're amazing, Apple support, actually. They're really amazing.
Incredibly
So,
patient.
yeah, you probably know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and what's amazing about this is you have all those options, but it's actually quite a disciplined record. You know, it's actually a pop record, isn't it? In the
What, The
sense,
Land of Collie?
yeah,
Do you think it's a pop record?
yeah. I think the songs that they're not free form. They sound
No.
structured. They're melodic. They do work as pop songs.
Yeah, yeah. I go especially Alien Boys and yeah, I think maybe the free form was more approached with the saxophones. So I had these structures, yeah, these tight structures which came from the vocals and the chords. And then the saxophones I could experiment. A lot of those were just spontaneous takes, but I molded them in quirky ways so to fit into the songs. Like sometimes they'd just be squeaks, but they sounded good, you know, like in a certain. So I had a lot of fun playing with saxophones because I had unlimited tracks. I'd never had that before. I'd worked on an 8-track or at the most a 16-track. So to have unlimited tracks, I was just in seventh heaven until it came to editing it all
Yeah, yeah.
and sending it to an engineer who would not have anything to do with it until it was condensed to just a few tracks.
It's a
I,
different
I
discipline.
actually only spent maybe 1 or 2 days recording a part, but then maybe 2 weeks trying to make it accessible to an engineer.
And what's the plans now? Are you going to like take this out on the road? You got to make more tracks, or do you not have a plan? You don't have to have a plan, do you?
Well, there's a vague plan. I'm in India now. It was very intense, sort of 3.5 years making the album, and then finding an outlet for the album, and because it wasn't just a new album, it was everything. It was the 4 retrospective albums as well. So it was just getting it all together and, you know, overseeing the artwork and Celeste Bell helped me a lot in the beginning, Polystyrene's daughter. She kind of got me channeled with the outer world, and she introduced me to somebody called Kurt Pagan Davies, who's worked with Cargo Records before, and we thought the best thing for the new material would be to do a box set, include the new album in the box set, and then release it separately. And we're also going to release the box set albums as standalones as well, so people will be able to buy those separately. And we've got a new, so Kurt Pagan Davies, probably more than anyone, has just helped me get the whole show on the road.